position to where we now are. They were going through that in the late 20th century in the UK. And I will make it implicitly comparative so that an informed reader anywhere, but especially an informed American reader, can see very clearly all of the parallels and can see how this gendered labor change, this discarding of women's technical talent led to terrible things in the British context. And also, we can talk about this more, how it led to very similar things in the U.S. context, only it was a little bit less obvious because we were sort of the, last man standing after World War II in terms of Western powers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I used to work in technology too, information technology as well. And, a lot of the people that I worked with, even people who had been working in the field for 20 years, were women who were, mainframe programmers who were now having to learn how to do, web developing and how to turn those mainframe programs into web programs and like learning all of those new skills. But they had the original technical skills. It was just learning something completely new. I wonder to what extent, we were women in the United States or people in the United States were able to kind of run with this tech bubble thing because a lot of people just didn't understand what the heck was going on. and I think that, you look at the government in the United States and you look at the hearings that Mark Zuckerberg has with congressmen and senators these days. And it's just very clear that most senators and congresspeople have no idea what Facebook does, what information technology is and how it works.
Yeah. It's sort of like getting a baby who's never been outside to like understand a freight train. It's
yes.
It's horrifying. And that's not to say that, I'm not claiming, I'm some expert, but
sure.
Yeah, there's I think a willful disregard and failure to even try to understand a lot of these systems on the part of some of our more entrenched leadership. And I had the same experience as you. When I was a sysadmin, my contemporaries or my colleagues who were like my same age were mostly young men. And then our big bosses who are of a different generation, they were women. And that was actually, working in that job. That was the germ of like, why is this? And our bosses would say, you don't understand. There used to be a lot more women around. And that was actually like the germ of this project and why I started even looking into this question. So I think you were asking about just kind of how do we deal with like what's going on right now with people not seemingly understanding what's going on with technology? Is that sort of what you wanted to get into?
That's part of it. I mean, what I think is interesting about the British case is that the shift in demographics of the people who were working in technology actually led this really robust computing field and really robust computing companies to, fail and no longer exist. I mean, the fact that you could get access to those records because those companies no longer existed, and you were able to draw a line or at least draw a correlation between the shift in demographics of the computing population and the decline of these companies.
Yeah. So the British case is like this wonderful little like petri dish example, and not wonderful in the sense of positive, but just wonderful in the sense that you can see historical cause and effect in action. And what happens is, they have the first digital programmable electronic computers. And it's a really fucking big, I'm sorry, can I swear?
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can swear.
Okay. It's a really fucking big deal because they create them during World War II, specifically for the purpose of code breaking, specifically for the purpose of what we would now call cyber warfare, to wield these computers as weapons so that they don't get invaded and completely destroyed. During the worst parts of the Blitz, there were more people dying on the quote unquote home front in the UK than were dying at the actual front. So that gives you some sense of the pressure they were under. And so this historical first is really important because it ends up actually changing the course of the war. They know where and when, the Allies know where and when to land on D-Day because of the intelligence provided by these computers, which were created by primarily by an engineer at the Post Office Research Station. His name was Tommy Flowers, not Alan Turing. Alan Turing had really nothing to do with these computers. Tommy Flowers creates these electronic computers in the face of a lot of disbelief that they will work, because people think having thousands and thousands of vacuum tubes, that's how they did the electronics at the time. They think that having so many of these fragile tubes working all at once is going to mean that one is breaking like every 5 minutes and the machine will have no uptime. And Flowers says if we run a lower current through them, if we basically kind of run them at half power, we just have to do, kind of switch on, switch off, to use these as switches, we can make sure that they won't break. And also we'll never turn them off. So they never go through that heat cool cycle. Mm-hmm. We'll just keep them on constantly. And it works. And the people running these machines, so programming, as we would call it today, and operating, and even putting them together when they arrive at Bletchley Park, these are all women because, of course, the majority of workers on the home front during World War II in Britain, they were all women. But the women were doing this work not just because they were the ones sort of left behind. They were doing this work because this work was seen as, okay, this is work appropriate to women, because women were the original human computers. Sure. They were doing human computing well before the war, where they would just, they were the machine. It was more like a job instead of the name for a machine. And so then, as you point out, fast forward 30 years and the British computing industry, it's all but defunct. It's basically imploded. And a lot of people had come forward with explanations for that had to do with Britain's broader decline and with business history. And I'm not saying that the things they said are wrong, but they were not the whole picture at all, because what I uncovered, and this was actually a surprise to me, I thought I'd go into the archives and I'd tell a story about, rah, there were women in early computing, right? But what happened was, after I saw, okay, here's how women get pushed out of the field, here's why and when, and here's how it actually starves the field of labor, causes disastrous decisions on the part of the government and the computing industry, which the government is trying to control, and actually lead, these decisions actually lead to the main computer company not creating the products that are needed at the time, because they don't have enough people to run them. So they create ever larger and larger mainframes that can be run by fewer and fewer people, mm-hmm. because they don't have enough technical people. And they do that at a point in time when the mainframe is on the way out, and it basically, everything just collapses in on itself. So it's not like IBM came in and beat them. They were already, pretty much, they had beaten themselves, and IBM just kind of picked up the pieces.
Well, and this is just such an interesting kind of intersection of computing history, labor, and gender, and how all of these fields really intersect with one another. And it's important, I think, to look at history through the lens of gender, and to look at labor history through the lens of gender. I mean, we're celebrating International Women's Day tomorrow. We're recording this on the 7th. International Women's Day is the 8th. And International Women's Day was all about labor, was all about, understanding women's impact on the labor force. And as a gender and computing and labor historian, what do you think the most important thing that you are contributing to the history generally is by looking at things kind of in this intersection of these fields? I mean, that's a big question, but
that's such a powerful question, because, as you were saying that, and as you were talking about International Women's Day, you know, the image that I have in my mind is of all those charred bodies lying on the sidewalk, the women in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory who were locked in, burned to death, and tried to jump out the windows to save their lives. And as you point out, that was the basis for what became International Women's Day. The fact that women workers who were not just women, but they were working class, they were mostly immigrants, they had all these sorts of different categories, you know, that created their status in society, and made it, you know, very dangerously low, right? And they had to fight for their rights. To get to the point where, you know, now we enjoy things like workplace protections and, you know, a week that has livable hours and not being locked into our workplaces. And I think that your question is like, it really makes me glad that you asked me that and asked me in that way, because I feel like a lot of times people don't believe that women are actually workers, that oh, maybe they work, but they work in the home, or maybe they work for pay, but the work they do there is sort of incidental. It's just adding to, you know, the family's take-home pay. It's not like they're supporting a family, or that what they do in the workforce isn't as important as their male peers. And that is, well, it's offensive, of course.
That shit makes me so angry. So angry.
It makes me very mad. And it also is just wrong. It's just not true. It's not true now. And it's never been true historically. You know, this idea that, oh, women used to like just be the angel in the home. No, that's not something that was true for most women. Not at all. This was all sort of an idealized view of maybe what, you know, middle class men in Britain in the 19th century, for instance, wanted women to be and do in society. But that's not the case. And so women are workers, and so many of the rights that we get in society, whether we're men or women or no matter what our gender is, we get those rights, sadly enough, through our participation in the labor force and through our being sort of productive economic citizens. And so women's history is labor history, and both of those things are really important. So if I was going to like try to talk myself up and say, okay, what's the most important thing I'm doing? I've heard actually from a lot of women who are computer programmers today, who work in the field right now in 2019, and they are interested in my book, and they read my book and they say, thank you for writing that. It feels really validating. That's exactly how it is today.
That's sad. It's sad that we have not come that much further than we were at, 50, 60 years ago.
Yes, it is so, so sad. And I'm going to bring things up in a moment, I promise. But yes, it's so sad because these women are saying, I look at women being pushed out of the field in the 50s and 60s and the glass ceiling and the way that their technical skills were devalued and they were paid less and they were told this isn't really a good place for you to work, and they were just pushed out in all sorts of ways. And they say, that's how I feel now. But here's the good part. Then they say, they also got mad, right? And they take this book because books have weight and authority, right? And supposedly, the people who write them are super smart, we hope. And they take this book and they show it to their boss, or they show it to a bunch of people in their workplace, and they say, we got to have a talk, okay? Because this shit has been going on too long. And so I spoke to, for instance, like a book club at IBM where they read my book. And then I came in and I talked to them, and it was very...
Hold on a second. IBM's got a book club?
IBM Chicago has a book club. And you know what? I think IBM actually has a company-wide book club. So yeah, I mean, the workers who work there, like, they're not management for the most part, they're just like you and me, and they're trying to make sense of what's going on and how they can, how they can live and succeed as workers. So like, there's a lot of, I think we're realizing there's a lot of class solidarity and sort of cross industry solidarity with tech workers once they actually start seeing themselves as workers instead of as, oh, we're sort of more management aligned.
Okay. That's really interesting. And I think